They said he was the most dangerous patient Ward C had ever received. 12 days without a spoken word. 12 days of sitting in the back corner of room 9 with his knees pulled up and his eyes on every door and every window, tracking the staff's movements with the cold precision of a man whose brain had never quite left the field. He had fractured a security guard's wrist on day 3 when the guard tried to confiscate a plastic meal tray. He had knocked an orderly off his feet on day 7 when the orderly attempted to replace his ankle splint. He had not eaten a full meal since admission, had not allowed anyone near his neck wound, and had not, by any account, slept longer than 45 minutes at a stretch. But when Erin Macy stepped into the open doorway of room 9 at 2200 hours on the evening of day 12 and raised her left hand, 3 fingers pressed together, a slow arc outward like tracing the curve of a hill, then 2 knuckles tapped quietly against her collarbone. The man in the corner stopped breathing. 3 full seconds of absolute stillness. Then he exhaled, long and fractured and unraveling at the edges, and looked at her like a man who had just heard a voice he had believed he would never hear again. The San Diego VA Medical Center sat 3 miles from the coast, and on quiet mornings you could smell the Pacific from the parking structure. Erin had always liked that about it. She had taken the position here 2 years ago, transferring from a smaller clinic in Phoenix, where the work was steady but the cases were routine. She was an occupational therapist, 29 years old, with a quiet face that people often forgot the moment she left a room. Her supervisor had introduced her to the department head during her first week as one of our newer additions, and then moved on without waiting to hear her name. She had never corrected that habit in other people. It was useful to be underestimated. What her personnel file did not include, because no one had thought to ask, was that Erin Macy had grown up as the youngest sister of Luke Macy, who had enlisted in the Army at 19, qualified for Special Forces selection at 23, and been assigned to 3rd Special Forces Group before he was 25. Luke had spent 8 years doing work he could describe only in the most general terms, and he had taken that vagueness seriously. But he had also been, above everything else, Erin's older brother. And Luke had believed that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take from you. He had taught her things in their parents' backyard in Flagstaff, Arizona, in the summers when he came home on leave. Not how to shoot. Their father had covered that, but how to observe, how to read a room before entering it, how to tell the difference between a person who was afraid and a person who was calculating, and he had taught her the signs. It's not official, he had told her, sitting cross-legged on the porch steps, demonstrating slowly. It's what our team uses. We made most of it up. Borrowed some from USMC Scout, modified it. If you ever see someone doing this. He pressed 3 fingers together, swept the arc, tapped his collarbone. It means I see you. I know you're safe. I'm not going to move against you. Why would a stranger do that to me? Erin had asked. Luke had smiled in the particular sideways way he had, the one that said he was answering a question she hadn't quite asked yet. They probably wouldn't. But just in case. Luke Macy was killed 14 months ago. The Army described it as a vehicular accident during a logistics operation in Afghanistan. Erin did not believe that. She had never believed it. The timing, the sealed file, the absence of any witnesses willing to be named, all of it had sat in her chest like a stone she had learned to breathe around. She had come to the San Diego VA and asked for the hardest cases and said nothing about why. She learned about Jonah Vidal on a Thursday afternoon when Dr. Paula Sohn called her into her office and closed the door. Dr. Scowen was the ward's chief psychiatrist, a woman in her mid-50s with iron gray hair and a reputation for precision that her staff either admired or feared, depending on the day. She slid a thin folder across the desk without preamble. Master Sergeant Jonah Vidal, she said, 41 years old, Army Special Forces, admitted 12 days ago in what appears to have been a voluntary surrender to civilian paramedics, though he has not confirmed that interpretation because he has not confirmed anything. He has not spoken, not one word, not to me, not to the chaplain, not to the crisis counselor we brought in from Balboa Naval. She paused. He has tolerated meals left on the tray table, Tolerated the television on low volume. Tolerated being in the building. That appears to be the extent of his tolerance. Erin looked at the intake photograph. Jonah Vidal was a large man, wide through the shoulders, with deep-set eyes and a jaw that looked like it had been built for endurance rather than expression. The photograph had been taken from a distance. No one had gotten close enough for a standard intake photo. "He's assaulted staff," Erin said, reading. "When they approached without warning, yes. Or when they attempted to touch his ankle splint." Dr. Chcone pressed her fingertips together. "The splint is of particular concern. It was applied by paramedics in the field and should have been replaced on day 2. It is now day 12, and every attempt to remove it has been met with immediate, disproportionate force. The orthopedist suspects underlying joint damage we cannot assess without proper access. The wound at his neck has not been properly cleaned since admission." She held Erin's gaze. "The psychiatric transfer paperwork for the lockdown facility in Riverside was drafted this morning. If we cannot make meaningful contact by 0600 tomorrow, we send him. It is not what I want. A locked facility will not help this man, and I know it, but I have a staff I am responsible for." "I'll take the night shift on Ward C," Erin said. Dr. Chcone studied her for a moment. "He is physically dangerous, Erin." "I know. Let me try." She spent 2 hours in the records room before her shift ended, reading everything the file contained about Jonah Vidal's operational history, which was not much. The specifics had been redacted in solid black blocks. What remained were fragments, multiple deployments across 3 theaters, commendations she couldn't read the details of, a list of qualifications that told more than the narrative sections. Hollow certified, Special Forces Advanced Urban Combat, 2 years assigned to a joint task force whose name had been blacked out entirely. She almost missed it. In the administrative section, a line noting his unit assignment 3 years prior. The unit identifier had been partially redacted, but the prefix remained: 3rd SFG, 3rd Special Forces Group. Luke's group. Erin sat very still in the empty records room, the fluorescent light humming above her. Then she closed the file, stood up, and walked to Ward C. The corridor outside Room 9 at 2200 hours was dim and very quiet. The security guard, posted outside, the replacement after the wrist fracture incident, looked at Erin with an expression that was equal parts relief and pity when she said she was taking the night watch. "He threw the dinner tray at 1830, the guard said. "Didn't eat. The monitoring equipment shows his heart rate has been between 95 and 110 all day." "Thank you," Erin said. "I'd like you to wait at the end of the hall." The guard started to object. She looked at him steadily and he went. She stood outside the closed door. Room 9 had a small reinforced window at eye level. Through it she could see the corner where Jonah Vidal sat. He was exactly as the reports had described. Spine against the wall, knees up, eyes already on the door. He had seen her before she moved. Erin did not reach for the handle immediately. Instead, she stood in the rectangle of pale corridor light and let him see her. Let him read her. She knew, from Luke's patient and occasionally exasperated instruction, that men trained the way Jonah Vidal had been trained did not need a great deal of time to assess a person. They needed to be given something accurate to assess. She stood still, kept her hands visible, did not perform calm. She simply was, because she had spent 14 months learning to sit with the stone in her chest and breathe around it. Then she raised her left hand. 3 fingers pressed together, a slow arc outward, 2 knuckles tapped once against her collarbone. Through the small window, she watched Jonah Vidal stop breathing. She pushed the door open and walked in. She did not turn on the overhead light. The room was lit by the ambient glow from the monitoring equipment and the thin blue edge of streetlight through the blinds. She walked to the chair beside the window. Not the one beside the bed, not anywhere that required her to cross directly in front of him. And sat down. He was watching her with an intensity that most people would have found unbearable. Erin did not look away. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then Jonah Vidal raised his right hand. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a man testing the weight of something he had carried alone for too long. He pressed 3 fingers together, drew the outward arc, tapped his collarbone. And then he added something she had not seen before. The back of his hand pressed flat against his sternum, then turned outward, palm up. A question. Open-handed, waiting. "Where?" she said quietly. "You're asking where I learned it." He waited. "My brother taught me," she said. "Luke Macy. He was 3rd group. He used to practice the signs with me in the summers when he came home on leave." The change in Jonah Vidal's face was not dramatic. It did not collapse or crumple. It was more like watching a wall become briefly transparent, just for a moment, just long enough to see what was behind it, before the stone expression returned. But the expression that came back was different from before. The lethal watchfulness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. Something was listening now that had not been listening before. He made another sign. Right hand flat, fingers together, sliced sideways twice, quick. Erin worked through it slowly. Luke had always said her retention was good, but her speed was slow. "Passed," she said finally. "Something finished. Something gone." Jonah's eyes moved to the door, then back to her. "You know Luke is gone," she said. A single, slow nod. "How long have you known?" she asked. He raised one finger, then tapped the side of his neck where his wound was. "Since whatever happened that gave you that injury," she said. He looked at the ceiling for a moment with an expression of extraordinary exhaustion. Then he reached toward the monitor beside the bed, picked up a dry erase marker the nursing staff used to note the date on the whiteboard above the tray table, and held it out to her. She crossed the room, careful, measured steps, stopping at the distance she felt him permit, and took it from his hand. He pointed to the whiteboard. She understood. She uncapped the marker and waited. He signed slowly, patiently, letting her parse each phrase. She wrote as he went. It took 40 minutes. By the time the whiteboard was full, Erin's hand was shaking. What Jonah Vidal had carried in silence for 12 days, what he had not trusted a single person at this facility with, was this. 14 months ago, his unit had been tasked with a reconnaissance operation in the Kunar province. The stated objective was to track the movement of a weapons procurement network. What they had found instead, in a compound that should have been empty, was a transaction in progress. 2 men in civilian contractor clothing, supervising the transfer of current issue American military equipment to a group that had no business receiving it. Night vision technology. Encrypted satellite communications. Serialized and traceable. Luke Macy had been the one to pull the serial numbers. Luke had been fast, careful, and thorough. Luke had always been thorough, which was a quality that had made him exceptional in the field, and had, in the end, made him a liability to someone. The contractor company's name was Varo Group LLC. It had Pentagon procurement contracts dating back 9 years. It had senior DoD liaisons embedded across multiple theater commands. When Jonah's unit called for immediate extraction after Luke transmitted the serial data over their encrypted channel, those liaisons had somehow received the transmission coordinates. The vehicle Luke was riding in was destroyed by an IED 14 minutes after they cleared the compound. The Army called it a vehicular accident during a logistics operation. 3 weeks ago, after a year of careful and extremely quiet work, Jonah's surviving contacts had located the physical transaction records of the Varo Group dealings. Paper records, scanned, transmitted to Jonah in the form of a printout folded into a waterproof document sleeve. The sleeve was strapped to his ankle, beneath the original field's splint, beneath his sock. He had refused every attempt to remove or replace the splint because the sleeve was not visible unless the splint was fully removed under good lighting by someone specifically looking for it. He had come to the San Diego VA because a civilian hospital was the one place the people protecting Varo Group would not expect him to be. Because he had been running out of time and had not yet found a single person he trusted enough to hand the evidence to. Erin set the dry erase marker down on the tray table. She looked at the whiteboard. Then she looked at him. Luke found the primary record, she said carefully. He transmitted it before the IED. And you've been carrying what he sent ever since. Jonah held her gaze. His eyes were red at the edges from days of insufficient sleep, and there was a grief in them so large and so carefully managed that Erin recognized it the way you recognized a mirror. He raised his hand, one final sign, palm flat to his chest, then extended outward toward her. She knew that one. Luke had taught her that one first, before all the others, on a summer afternoon when she was 17. And he was 20 and about to leave for basic training, and she had cried and pretended she wasn't. It meant, I trust this to you. At 0312, the sound of footsteps in the corridor changed. Erin heard it before she could have explained why it registered as wrong. The rhythm was off, not the soft-soled, purposeful tread of night shift nursing staff, not the measured pace of a security rounds walk. These were hard-soled shoes moving in tight formation, 3 sets, pausing outside room 9. Jonah had already heard it. He was upright, back off the wall, both hands braced on the bed frame, eyes on the door. Not medical, he signed, fast and small. She had already moved to his ankle. With Jonah holding himself still through visible pain, she worked the Velcro tabs apart. The field splint was rigid and worn, and had been there for 2 weeks, and peeled it back. Pressed against the inside surface, against his skin, was a waterproof document sleeve no larger than a paperback. She slid it free and tucked it inside the flat internal pocket of her scrub's top. The door handle moved. Occupational therapist Macy. The voice from the corridor was smooth and unhurried, the tone of a man accustomed to being listened to. Please open the door. We have updated discharge orders for Master Sergeant Vidal. Discharge orders. At 0312. Erin looked at Jonah. His expression told her everything she needed to know about what kind of discharge they had in mind. She walked to the door and opened it 4 inches, keeping her shoulder against the frame. The man in the hallway was wearing a gray suit jacket over a tactical undershirt, a DoD identification badge on a lanyard, and the flat-controlled eyes of someone who had worked very hard on the rest of his face but had not completely managed the eyes. Behind him stood 2 men in tactical vests, making a creditable impression of being neutral. Step aside, please, the man said. We're facilitating the patient's transfer to a specialized federal medical facility. Dr. Scowen's transfer order isn't until 0600, Erin said. Plans have changed. He placed his palm flat against the door and pushed, steadily, forcing it open another 6 inches. This supersedes the attending physician's schedule. Step aside. He is not medically cleared for transfer. His ankle is unsplinted. His neck wound is open. If you move him without proper stabilization... Ms. Macy, the pleasantness was gone, last time. He shoved the door hard. Erin did not step back. She spun left, slammed her palm against the wall panel, and hit the general emergency alarm. Not the code blue, which required physician confirmation, but the ward alarm, which did not. The corridor filled immediately, with a pulsing tone, and the overhead lights snapped to full brightness. The man in the gray jacket reached for her arm. His fingers had just closed on her sleeve when the double doors at the end of Ward C burst open. Cliff Owens, the charge nurse, came through first at a speed that surprised everyone in the hallway. Behind him came 2 night nurses, an on-call physician, and because Erin had spent 2 hours before her shift leaving very specific messages for very specific people, NCIS Special Agent Darla Ruiz, who had driven from Coronado on the theory that anything requiring that much specificity at midnight was probably worth the drive. Erin pulled the document sleeve from inside her scrubs and held it above her head. This patient is a material witness in a federal procurement fraud case involving active DD contractors, she said, loudly and clearly, making sure her voice reached every person in that corridor. This document sleeve contains physical evidence. These men are not here to provide medical care. They are here to prevent this evidence from reaching NCIS. The man in the gray jacket turned to look at Agent Ruiz. Something shifted in his face that was very close to the precise moment a person realizes a situation has passed the point of management. Hands where I can see them, Agent Ruiz said, already moving, badge in hand. All 3 of you, right now. 6 weeks later, the morning light in Ward C was the particular warm gold of late California autumn. And Jonah Vidal was sitting in a chair for the first time, his ankle properly splinted and elevated, a cup of coffee going cold on the tray table beside him because he kept forgetting to drink it. He still did not speak often. The ward psychiatrist noted in her clinical log that this was consistent with a patient who had spent over a year in sustained hypervigilance and would require significant time and targeted therapeutic support to rebuild comfort with verbal communication. She did not note, because she did not know, that on the morning of his third week of treatment, Jonah Vidal had said one sentence to Erin Macy while she was guiding him through a wrist mobility exercise. "He talked about you," Jonah had said. His voice was rougher than she had imagined, lower and slower than his signing suggested. "Luke, he said you were the sharpest person he knew, and that it was annoying because you were his little sister and he was supposed to be the impressive one." Erin had not responded for a moment. She had continued the exercise, her hands steady on his wrist, moving through the arc. "He was wrong," she said finally. "He was the impressive one." Jonah was quiet for a while, then he was the one who wouldn't quit. That's a different thing, but it comes to the same place. She thought about that sentence for 3 weeks. On the morning, the Department of Justice released its preliminary indictment. Erin was at the nurse's station updating patient logs when Cliff Owens set a printed copy of the press release beside her keyboard without comment and walked away. 14 names, 3 former senior executives at Varro Group LLC, 2 current Pentagon procurement officials, 1 former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. Luke Macy's name appeared in the 3rd paragraph, not as a casualty statistic, as a source, as the individual whose field transmission had formed the evidentiary foundation of the entire investigation. A transmission that had been quietly flagged, quietly buried, and attributed to equipment malfunctions by a logistics officer whose name now appeared in the indictment. At the bottom of the page, a single line noted that the Army was reviewing the circumstances of Staff Sergeant Lucas James Macy's death, and that his official record was pending correction. Erin read it twice. Then she folded it carefully along its original creases and put it in her scrub pocket. She walked down the corridor to room 9. Jonah looked up when she came in. She handed him the folded paper without a word. He opened it and read it, and she watched his face move through things she did not have names for, though she recognized most of them by their weight. When he reached Luke's name in the 3rd paragraph, he went still. After a long moment, he set the paper down on the tray table. He raised his left hand. 3 fingers pressed together, the slow outward arc, 2 knuckles to the collarbone. "I see you. I know you're safe. I'm not going to move against you." Erin raised her left hand and made the same sign back. Then she sat down in the chair beside the window, and in the warm gold light of a California morning, neither of them needed to say anything else. If you've ever carried the weight of an unanswered question about someone you lost, you already understand what Erin carried into that room. Sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is walk through a door that everyone else has walked away from. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today. And subscribe to Kind Tales for more stories about the people who refuse to leave anyone behind.